This content is not suitable for children and may contain depictions of violence.
Hi, I'm your host Cambo. Grab a beer and pull up a deck chair. This is True Crime Island, another true crime podcast. I'm a bit out of breath already. So, Islanders, hope you're all well. And last episode we had a bit of a wild ride as I told you about Christopher Wilder's early years in Australia and how he left to go back to the United States after things got a bit hot for him, especially with the Wanda Beach murders, where his estranged wife and her mother had approached police with information that may have linked him to that horrific event. Also, I talked about how he continued to use his modelling scam to lure young women into compromising positions, photographing them in the nude and then raping them. He seemed to be able to evade justice either totally or with very light sentences, and even though he came close many times to going to jail, he didn't, and he just went back to doing what he was doing. Now, I've got a few more references tonight. We've got Megan Good of the Charlie Project, News Press Fort Myers. We've got Miami News, Miami Herald, the Palm Beach Post. Don't forget that book, The Snapshot Killer by Duncan McNabb, and a blog by Laurie Johnson. Okay. So nowadays, we've got, Tinder, Grindr, plenty of fish, all of that sort of stuff. Well, back in the day, you could actually go to a studio and make your own videotape. The service would have all these tapes on hand, and you could order a compilation of the type of people you might like to meet. Well, Wilder did this, and this was in 1981. In his dating video, he talked a lot about himself and said that he wanted a long relationship, but not marriage. And he was into water skiing and surfing. Now, he was looking for someone with depth and sincerity in their early 20s. The reality is he never surfed or water skied. He wanted a woman that would always be home for him and wouldn't ask questions about his whereabouts. And he probably just needed a maid with benefits. Now, this video would become useful to the FBI a couple of years later. In late 1982, Wilder went back to Australia to visit his parents. He continued his modelling scam while there, and on the 28th of December 1982, Wilder approached two 15-year-old girls at Manly Beach, telling them they could become models and offering to do a photo shoot of them. He took them in his car to Mossman, forced them to pose nude. He took photos, then drove them to King's Cross, where he indecently assaulted them. Back then, King's Cross was our red light district. He released them and they went to police. He was arrested and charged with entice with intention to hold and indecent assault. But he was able to post bail, and that was set at this huge amount, $400,000. Back then, that's a huge amount of money. Now, this was made up of $200,000 from his parents, $150,000 from his uncle, and $50,000 from Wilder himself. Now, this allowed him to return to the United States on condition he returned for his committal hearing on May the 7th, 1983. Now, this date was pushed back to the 4th of August 1983, and he did return and fronted up to Manly Court for the 2-day hearing. Now, this was a committal hearing, and that's to see whether there's enough evidence for a full trial. The committal hearing dragged on, and it was clear that the amount of witnesses the prosecution had could not be cross-examined in the 2 days set aside. Now, it wasn't that close to Christmas, but with everything happening, the only dates that the judge had free would be into early 1984 to complete this committal hearing. It was set for the 3rd of April, 1984. As Wilder had complied with his bail conditions previously, this was continued and he left Australia and returned to the United States. Now, just a side note to this, the FBI believed Wilder was responsible for the rape of a young girl in San Mateo in San Francisco on his way to Australia for that committal hearing, and we will get into other cases he was suspected of at the end of the show. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit crazy. Wilder knows that he's probably going to prison if he returns to Australia. It's highly likely his case will go to court, and highly likely he's going to be found guilty and do time, and doing time inside is one of the things Wilder fears most. Now, back in Florida, Wilder continued in his ways. His wealth was increasing and he tried to show that off with those around him. Now, he had a huge fake diamond ring, designer label clothes and nice cars. He would often be seen with 2 escorts whenever he went out, and he wasn't shy to admit that they were escorts either, commenting to some that they were $150 an hour or so each. Now, he thought this was cool, but most people would try to keep their distance, and it brought him no friends. His business partner wasn't impressed by him either. Wilder would go out to jobs and demand an upfront payment, so when his business partner invoiced the client at the end of the job, they would come back telling him that they've already paid an amount to Wilder. At times, Wilder would disappear for days and not answer his pager. On his return, Wilder would just say to his business partner that he'd been to Daytona, always Daytona, and would never elaborate on that. He was now racing his Porsche, his black Porsche, and had a small team behind him. Now, this is where things not only get crazy, but right out of control. The first person I want to tell you about is Elizabeth or Beth Kenyon. She was the daughter of founder of Kenyon's Variety convenience store. Now, with hard work, the store expanded and became quite profitable. Now, Beth got her teaching degree in Florida and was a cheerleader. She worked with special needs kids and did a bit of modelling. She was described as not only beautiful on the outside, but also on the inside. She was pretty good at sports, she was athletic, and went to church. And she was very careful with her dating, only going out with guys she met through her friends. In 1982, she was in a Lowenbrau beer commercial and worked at Daytona Beach races. She was on the New Year's Eve Orange Bowl float in Miami. She was on the first float and the event was televised nationally. She was a finalist in the 1983 Miss Florida pageant held in October of 1982. Now, this is where she would meet Christopher Wilder. He was in modelling scam mode. He put on his Aussie accent and told her he was a photographer for the Australian magazine Pics. Now, Pics was a trashy tabloid-type mag with articles about scandals, had pictures of girls wearing hardly anything, and, you know, that sort of thing you'd find in mechanics' bathrooms. I don't want to offend any of the mechanics listening, but you know what I mean. Wilder had fake media credentials to get into the pageant, and being fake Australian credentials, they weren't closely checked by the event organisers. So when he approached some of the girls at the event who were young and naive, Wilder came across as pretty genuine. He met Beth Kenyon at this pageant and gave her the usual spiel about being a photographer and modelling agent, and within days he was dating her. Not only did he play up his Aussie accent, but also the fact that he raced cars, as he found out she'd worked at Daytona Beach races in the past. Now, Wilder was very interested in her romantically, and they dated often, but he never pushed her into nude photography or tried to rape her like he did with all the other women. Wilder wasn't her type either, and with the age gap, she was happy to be his friend, but not a girlfriend. I think Wilder was going for a long-term relationship with Beth, seeing as though he had been single for a while. As I said before, he seemed to need a woman at home to take care of the house and be there for him, while he would then go out and commit horrendous acts on other women. Now, Beth even told her mum that photographers usually try to get nudes, but Wilder hadn't, and that he was a perfect gentleman. He even proposed to her, even though they had never kissed. So they were dating, but just as friends, not as dating as boyfriend-girlfriend. Beth declining his marriage proposal didn't faze him at all, and they remained friends. So he had other ideas on how to get there, I suppose. He organised modelling work for her at the 1984 Miami Grand Prix, where he would be racing his Porsche. This would be held in the last week of February. Now, she declined the offer as she was already working that weekend in New York. Now, hold on, this this case is about to go into overdrive now. And some of the following is directly from the Charlie Project, but edited for flow. Now, go and have a look at the Charlie Project website if you want to help out with missing people. February 26, 1984, Rosario Gonzalez went missing after working as a promotions girl at the Miami Grand Prix. She was handing out aspirin samples to the racegoers. Rosario was an aspiring model at the time of her disappearance and had participated in the Miss Florida Beauty Contest along with Elizabeth Kenyon. Rosario was last seen at the Miami Grand Prix racetrack, where she earned about $200 a day doing that promotional work. Witnesses state that she left the Grand Prix track between noon and 1 p.m. on February 26 with a Caucasian man in his 30s. Her blue 1980s Oldsmobile Cutlass was found parked near DuPont Plaza. Rosario was supposed to return home between 5 and 6 p.m, and she usually called whenever she was going to be late. She's never been heard of again. She resided with her parents in Homestead, Florida, 23 miles from Miami. Then just 6 days later, Elizabeth Kenyon, the friend of Wilder that we just heard about, disappeared after leaving her job at Coral Gables High School. Like I said, she worked there as a special needs teacher. Now, this was around 3 p.m. on the 5th of March 1984. She had spoken with the security guards before driving off in her Chrysler convertible. Apparently, she was spotted talking to a man who drove a Cadillac Eldorado at a servo or gas station on the 8th of March. This guy was identified as Wilder when shown a photo of him by police. Her car was found abandoned at Miami International Airport on March the 11th. She didn't have plans to travel and had not packed to go anywhere, and her name wasn't listed on any flights going out of Miami. Both Rosario and Beth have never been found. Now, at the time, reports of missing young women weren't always taken serious by police. Too often they would chase around town only to find the missing person had gone off for a few days. But when Rosario and Beth went missing only days apart and they both had links to Wilder, plus the determination of Beth's parents in hiring a private eye, this got police taking the missing persons report just a little bit more seriously. They did interview Wilder, but he said he hadn't seen Beth for at least a month or so. Now, this gave Wilder a bit of a head start, and he skipped town after the link between the two missing women and himself had been published in a newspaper. On the 15th of March, 15-year-old Colleen Osborne went missing after leaving her Daytona Beach home. Now, Wilder was staying in a motel in the area at the time. Her body was found a few weeks later in a shallow grave near a lake in Orange County. She was not formally identified until 2011. On March the 18th, Wilder lured 21-year-old Teresa or Terry Ferguson away from Merritt Island Mall in Satellite Beach and murdered her. Her body was found at Polk County in a canal in Canaveral Groves on March the 23rd. Then there's a phone call to the FBI. A girl had been kidnapped on March 20 and she had escaped her abductor. It was 19-year-old Linda Grover, who Wilder had abducted from Governor's Square Mall in Tallahassee, Florida. He drove her across state lines to Bainbridge, Georgia. Now, he did the modelling scam with her as well. She resisted going back to his studio, so he knocked her out and shoved her in his car. He dragged her from the car at gunpoint, then tried to strangle her in the trunk or the boot for the rest of the world. She woke up in a sleeping bag in the Glen Oaks Motel. Wilder tied her to the bed and superglued her eyes shut. He raped her, he beat her, and he didn't electrocute her, but he had a wire he could plug into the wall with bare wires which he could stick on her body. But she was able to break free, and she locked herself in the bathroom, making so much noise. She was screaming for help. She was banging on the doors and on the walls. Well, Wilder fled with all her belongings, and Linda was able to identify him in a photo lineup when she went to police. Now, because he took her over state lines, the FBI got involved, and he ended up making their most wanted list. On the 21st of March, Wilder met 23-year-old mother and nursing student Terry Walden in Beaumont, Texas, again in a shopping mall. He tried the modelling scam on her, but she turned him down. 2 days later, on the 23rd, he saw her at the same mall. Again, she turned him down when he asked her to do a photo shoot. He ends up attacking her because she was near her car in the car park. He knocks her out and shoves her into the back of her Mercury Cougar. He goes, grabs all his stuff from his car and chucks it in the Cougar and drives off. She was reported missing and her body was found floating in a canal on the 26th of March. She'd been stabbed 43 times in the breasts. Now, Wilder's car would be found at this mall car park, and in it they found hair from Teresa Ferguson. You see, back in the day, it was quite difficult to track someone like Wilder. He'd taken a large sum of money from his bank before going on the run, and if he did use his credit card, they used to use those old click-clack machines, and only purchases over $100 would be called in. Now, Wilder did use his business partner's stolen credit card, but stayed in motels that were under the $100 limit, so they wouldn't be reconciled for a couple of days. By the time police had a new lead from these credit card transactions, Wilder had already moved on. On March the 25th, Wilder abducted 21-year-old Susan Logan at the Penn Square Mall in Oklahoma City and drove her 180 miles north to Newton, Kansas. He took her to a motel room where he raped her and tortured her all night. Wilder then drove to Junction City, about 90 miles away, where he stabbed her to death, dumping her body in the Milford Reservoir. Now, on the night of March the 28th, he used his stolen Visa card at the motel he checked into. Now, the bill ended up going above $100. Now, when the amount got knocked back because it was a stolen credit card, stolen from his business partner, as I said, police and FBI raided the hotel as early as they could the next morning, but Wilder had already fled. Now, later in the day, that same day, March the 29th, 18-year-old Cheryl Bonaventura was abducted by Wilder in Grand Junction, Colorado. Well, not so much abducted at this stage, but lured into his scam. Witnesses saw them together at a diner in Silverton. They had told staff they were heading for Las Vegas. Cheryl was shot and stabbed to death sometime around March the 31st in Utah. Her body would be found on May the 5th near the Kanab River. On the 1st of April, 17-year-old Michelle Kaufman disappeared from a fashion show at the Meadows Mall in Las Vegas. Police asked all photographers at the show for their photographs. In one photo, Wilder is seen in the background watching the show. Her body was found on May the 13th near a Southern Californian road stop. Wilder's next victim would be 16-year-old Tina Marie Risico. She'd been applying for a job at Hickory Farms north of Torrance, California, when Wilder spotted her. He did the modelling scam to lure her in, offering her about $100 to take photos of her. He did take some photos, and then she wanted to go home. He pulled a gun on her and told her that her modelling days were over before taking her to a motel in El Centro. It's here he tied her to the bed and raped her. Now, she had a boyfriend and family who noticed her missing straight away, and police were notified. The store manager at Hickory Farms identified Wilder as the guy that approached her in the store. Now, Wilder didn't kill Tina. Instead, he used her, as he'd done before, to lure in other girls. She was scared for her life and did anything she could to stay alive. They went to Taos in New Mexico. Taos or Taos? Send me an email. Comment below. On the 7th of April, and Wilder's name and face were beginning to appear in newspapers and on TV. They even had the dating videotape he'd made playing on the nightly news. Now, I think at this stage, Wilder pretty much knew it wouldn't be long before there'd be some sort of showdown between him and the authorities. This probably saved Tina's life, as he could use her to get women and stay in the background away from public view. Wilder wasn't going to go into hiding. He was going to rape and kill while he still had a chance. 16-year-old Dawnette Wilt had been applying for a job at South Lake Mall, Gary, Indiana. She was approached by Tina, who told her that she could speak to the manager about the job and that he was waiting outside. Dornette followed Tina, and Wilder pulled a gun on her and forced her into the back of the car. Tina drove while Wilder taped her eyes and mouth, then repeatedly raped her in the back seat. They drove to Ohio, where they stayed for the night, while Wilder again raped Dornette, threatening both girls to stay quiet and not attempt to escape, or he would kill them both. The next day, they drove through Pennsylvania and into New York State, where they stopped at Niagara Falls. Now, it's here that Wilder saw Tina's parents on TV, pleading for her safe return. He again got Tina to drive to a wooded area in Kenyon, not far from Niagara Falls. Here, Wilder forced Dornette out of the car and marched her into the woods. He tried to strangle her, but she fought him off a little bit too well. So he stabbed her once in the front and once in the back. Dornette went limp, and Wilder got back in the car, and he and Tina drove off. Now, not satisfied that she was really dead, Wilder turned around and drove back to where he left Dornette, and was stunned when he saw that she was gone. Luckily, she'd played dead when he left her, and she was able to get help from a passing motorist and was taken to hospital. She survived. She did tell police that Wilder was heading for Canada and that he wasn't planning on being taken alive. Wilder and Tina's next stop was Eastview Mall in Victor, New York on April the 12th. Here in the parking lot, he saw 33-year-old Beth Dodge getting out of her gold Pontiac Trans Am. He got Tina to lure her over to his stolen Cougar, where he took Beth's keys and forced her into the back. Tina was told to follow in Beth's Trans Am. They drove a short distance to a gravel pit, where he forced Beth out of the car, walked her a short distance, where he shot her twice in the back. Now, I think he only did this thing on Beth because she had this gold Trans Am. He wanted to trade the Mercury Cougar for the Trans Am. So, he and Tina left in the Pontiac, leaving Teresa Walden's Mercury Cougar behind. Now, what's crazy about his next move is that he drives Tina to Logan Airport in Boston. He buys her a ticket to LA. He gives her about $100 cash and sets her free. Tina gets on the plane without telling anyone about her 9-day ordeal on the run with a crazed serial killer, and then she lands in LA. She still doesn't go to the cops. She gets in a cab to a shop where she went and bought some lingerie, but she was spotted by some friends who took her to police. Now here, she said that Wilder didn't want her with him when he was going to get killed. It was going to be a shootout, so he didn't want her around. So clearly, Wilder knew his time was up. On Friday the 13th of April, Wilder saw a 19-year-old woman on the side of the road with her broken down car. He offered her a lift to a gas station, or a servo, as we call them in Australia. She accepted it. After passing several gas stations and not stopping, she got freaked out and demanded to stop. Wilder pulled a gun on her, but she ended up sort of jumping out and rolling out of the car when he had to slow down, saving her life. Wilder drove off. He ended up dumping most of his stuff and all the trophies he kept from his victims, then headed to New Hampshire. Friday the 13th would bring Wilder some really bad luck. While stopped to gas up the car at Vic Getty's service station at the corner of Main and Bridge Streets in Colebrook, New Hampshire, Wilder was spotted by 2 state troopers. He was recognised from the FBI's most wanted posters, and they stopped their car, got out, and approached him. Wilder saw this. He reached into his car to grab his gun, but Leo Jellison, one of the troopers, jumped on Wilder's back, grabbing for the gun, which was a .357 Magnum, and 2 shots were fired. One went through Wilder into Jellison's chest, lodging in his liver. The second went into Wilder's heart, killing him instantly. Now, Jellison did survive. So Rosario Gonzalez had gone missing on February 26th. It was now 47 days later, and Wilder had actually been on the run for 26 of those days. He covered around 7,000 miles, or around 11,000 and a half kilometres. He went from one side of the country, Miami, to the other side, California, and back all the way over the other side up to New York. In Wilder's possession, police found, of course, the .357 Magnum, extra ammo, handcuffs, rolls of duct tape, rope, an electrical cord used to zap his victims, and a sleeping bag. Now, this being his kidnapping, torture, and murder kit. He also had his business partner's credit card that he'd stolen and a novel by British author John Fowles called The Collector. Now, this novel tells of an entomologist who collects butterflies. He also kidnaps an art student called Miranda and keeps her in his basement. He gives her everything she wants except her freedom. Now, Wilder knew this novel almost off by heart. It seemed to be some sort of fantasy of his. Now, Rosario Gonzalez and Beth Kenyons, they were both assumed to be Wilder's victims, and obviously they've been presumed dead. As I said before, their bodies have never been found. Although Wilder is known to have killed at least 8 women, he's thought to have killed many more. The Wanda Beach murders, where Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock were killed in 1965. If he did that, which I'm pretty sure he could have, that was in 1965. This was, I'm thinking, probably his first. In 1979, the body of Tammy Alexander was found in a field in Caledonia, New York. She'd been shot in the back of the head and suffered blunt force trauma also on her head. She wasn't actually identified until a few years ago, 2015, and she'd gone missing from Brooksville. Because she was found with an Autosport jacket, it's thought Wilder may have been involved because he wore the same brand of jacket when he was racing his Porsche. Mary Hare disappeared on February the 11th, 1981 from a parking lot in Fort Myers, Florida. 5 days later, 17-year-old Mary Opitz disappeared from the same parking lot. Mary Hare's body was found in June of 1981. She'd been stabbed in the back. On the 27th of June 1983, Shari Lynn Ball left home in Florida and told her parents she was going to New York to start a modelling career, but first she would be going to Boynton Beach to meet a friend, then come home, return just a pack of bags. A few hours later, she called her mum asking to borrow money. This would be the last time her mum would hear from her. She never came home for her bags or the money. She did call her boyfriend a few days later, telling him she was on her way to New York with a friend. Now, that was the last time he heard from her. Her parents reported her missing, but this wasn't taken serious by police. By October, her parents again went to police, and now she was listed as a missing person. On the 6th of July 1983, Tammy Lynn Leopard, a model, actress and beauty queen, disappeared. She'd won 280 of the 300 contests she'd entered. She was even in the movies Scarface, Spring Break and Little Darlings. Tammy was last seen near her home in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Now, she was acting a little bit weird the days before she went missing, telling friends she would be going away soon. Now, she was getting a lift the day she went missing with a friend when they had an argument, and she demanded that her friend stop so she could get out of the car. Now, she got out of the car at the Glass Bank near Cocoa Beach. That's a strange place in itself. It's gone now, but look that up. Tammy made a few unanswered calls to her aunt that day, and she was never seen again. She was reported missing on the 11th of July. The surviving police report said that she'd recently been introduced to a white male in his late 30s who made movies but had a reputation for getting into trouble with young girls. Now, this is believed to be Wilder. Most of that police report's missing. 25th of May 1983, Robin Melanie Adler disappeared in the same area. She left her boyfriend's house in Lokahatchee and was driving south to Bennigan's Lounge in Tamarack near her home. Her 1977 red Celica was found crashed with its battery missing on a dirt road near Royal Palm Beach. Her body was never found. Wilder was living in the area at the time, so he may have been involved. Nancy K. Brown, a 25-year-old from Rantoul, Illinois, disappeared from Cocoa Beach. She was on holidays on the 6th of June 1983. Her remains were discovered in Canaveral Groves in March 1984. July 1983, 2 young girls were abducted off Boynton Beach, driven away from the area and brutally assaulted. The girls told police the guy that picked them up said he was a photographer who worked for a modelling agency and offered to take them to a studio for a photo shoot. When they got in the car, he pulled a gun on them. He took them to a desolate place and raped them, and these two girls, they were only 10 and 12 years old. He hadn't disguised himself, but still, after the attack, he drove them back to Boynton Beach, but demanded their home address and phone number. Of course, the girls told their parents what had happened when they got home, and they contacted police. They would then get calls at their home by a man asking to talk to the 12-year-old. It was the same voice of the person that attacked her. She could recognise that sort of accent. Later, Wilder would be identified as this perpetrator. Now, interesting, it looks like the girl's mum had met Wilder at a bar before the attack. Probably found out she had two young girls. So this was no chance encounter. He'd actually stalked them for quite a while before he attacked them. The Broward County Jane Doe, aged between 18 and 35, was found floating in a canal on February 18, 1984 in Davie, Florida. This murder fits Wilder's MO, and he was nearby at the time. Now, there may be more victims of Christopher Wilder. Certainly there must be many more that he raped but never came forward to police. He spent his whole adult life raping, molesting and murdering young women, avoiding prison as he went. There are a lot of if-onlys in this story. He could have been stopped many times along the way on his 20-year crime spree. Probably the most crucial if-only, though, was when Wilder's first wife and mother-in-law went to police with information regarding their suspicions that he was the Wanda Beach murderer. What information they did have seems to be lost at time. But if he had been picked up, thoroughly interviewed, and then maybe he was the murderer, found guilty, stuck in jail, this trail of dead women would have stopped there. We'll really never actually know if it was him. Maybe some evidence will be uncovered someday to solve those murders. Now, he was named the Snapshot Killer, the Beauty Queen Killer, the Cross-Country Killer. Really, he's just a scumbag. Now, interestingly enough, I just finished recording the audio version of this, and I'm just going through my emails, getting the video version ready. I get an email, and I'm allowed to read it out. It says, "Hi Cambo, my husband and I are long-time listeners and fans." Beauty. "I heard your recent Christopher Wilder episode, and I thought you might be interested in this story. In 1977, I was 15 and on vacation in Boca Raton, Florida with my parents and my best friend. It was our last day, and my friend and I were walking on a path in the gated community where we were staying. A white van pulled over and the driver started chatting with us, asking, 'Are you girls models?' My friend and I were pretty trusting and naive, but it was also an era when girls didn't worry about serial killers in murder vans. We were flattered by the attention. The guy in the van said he was a model scout for the photographer Chris Wilder. He said he'd take us to Chris's home photo studio in Boynton Beach and we'd get photos we could use to start our portfolios, and that Chris had all kinds of connections in the modelling world. Like many teenage girls, my friend and I dreamed of becoming models. We were both tall and thin, but honestly at that stage we definitely still looked like children. No one would mistake us for 18-year-olds. We were both dying to go with this guy. It seemed like a dream come true. We were actually discovered by a model scout who could make us famous. The only problem was, our plane home was leaving in just a few hours. We almost went anyway, but we knew if we made my parents miss the plane, we'd be in so much trouble. The guy was very persistent, but we reluctantly said no. Next time we heard of Chris Wilder was the day, many years later, when he was in the shootout at the Canadian border. I think it's interesting that in 1977 he had someone working with him as a procurer. Investigators said Wilder was not murdering at that point, but how they can be so sure. What would have happened to us that day in Chris Wilder's home photo studio? And this is the thing that really bothers me. Did the cops ever know about or talk to this friend of Chris's who was picking up girls for him in a white murder van? I bet he knows some things, and I bet he never came forward. Okay, so that's my story about almost encounter with Christopher Wilder. Thank God we had those plane tickets. My friend and I definitely would have gotten in that van, and all it took was the line, "You girls should be models." Love your show, Tina. Thanks, Tina. What an amazing story. I'm glad you got it in before I did the video today. Okay, so that's the end of this crazy case. What a wild ride that was. I think he's been one of the worst I've covered, and he just kept getting away with the crimes until it escalated out of control, and he went on his killing spree right at the end, knowing his time was nearly up. Researching this, it just seemed to be name after name, photo after photo. Plotting the map on Google was crazy. You see, he actually did like endurance driving, so he just could go for ages and days. The FBI and police, they were always a step behind him. Okay, that's it for this week. If you want to support the island, there are links in the description for Patreon, PayPal and merch if you want to buy me a beer. Please feel free to comment, like and subscribe, and I would truly appreciate it if you share the channel. Hit the bell to be notified. Well, that's it. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas. Stay safe, and I might even get in another episode before the end of the year. I've been your host, Cambo. You've been watching True Crime Island, and as I always say, don't forget to delete your browser history. Good night, Merry Christmas, Boomfagalanga.